Endgame difficulty scaling has been all over the place in the Borderlands franchise, and it has me concerned for what can happen in a Borderlands 4. We've seen this with OP levels in Borderlands 2, then Mayhem levels in Borderlands 3, and now Chaos levels in Wonderlands. Enemies get more HP and deal more damage to you. That's kinda it. And it has been that way for every game in the series. Now, I do want to say that gaining additional loot is a plus for playing the harder difficulty, and that is a good addition. You should be rewarded for taking on the higher difficulties, but that isn't the focus of this video. Slapping on more enemy HP, shield, armor, damage only gets you so far. This concept is fine for a while, but eventually, it gets really repetitive. If combat doesn't evolve, then you're stuck in the same gameplay loop as you climb through levels. This is one of the major flaws of Borderlands 2 when it comes to OP levels, for enemies are the exact same but take many more shots to take down. However, Borderlands 3 had an interesting idea with the Mayhem modifiers, but for many people, the modifiers were a hassle to deal with and it didn't exactly deliver fun. Keeping it simple, Mayhem modifiers don't exactly make the enemy more challenging, instead it makes things around the enemy more challenging. They drop spinner traps, cryo orbs chase you, they spawn elemental pools under your feet, there are homing death skulls, drones that give them invincibility, and a lot more. Not only that, but it applies to every enemy in the game and they all feel the same. You're not even fighting the enemy at this point, you're fighting the environment. A perfect example is to think of the Magic Slaughter Arena from Tina DLC in Borderlands 2. It is one of the most hated slaughter maps due to the environmental hazards. The floors open up for insta-death, elements spew everywhere, and spikes impale you from the ground and slow you down. Just like Mayhem modifiers, you're not fighting the enemy, but instead, you're fighting the environment. Moving forward here, we see the same Mayhem modifier system return to Wonderlands. This time around, they're called curses. And they do the exact same as Mayhem modifiers from Borderlands 3. They are the same environmental hazards that you avoid on the battlefield. Now, the nice thing about curses is they are mostly optional when taking on the endgame chaos chambers, but eventually you will have to take one in order to proceed in the chamber. The bottom line is that enemy combat remains the same for all difficulty levels. They will take more and more shots to defeat as you gain additional levels. This is one reason why I stopped after reaching Chaos 20 in Wonderlands. I had no desire to climb to Chaos 50 since it was more of the same thing. Scaling enemy HP and damage isn't enough for looter shooters nowadays. I personally think it's an outdated system if that's going to be the majority of your endgame in a video game. The combat needs to evolve to keep players on their toes. And I'm not talking about adding more environmental hazards. The enemy or boss itself should be more challenging. One example I would like to give is the mirror content we got in Wonderlands. While it was very unpopular for many, it still added a core concept that would benefit any Borderlands title, an evolving boss as difficulty increases. The nice thing about this is they are not only getting the basics of more HP and damage, but also brand new attacks that make them more of a threat. The shark boss we got in Mirror 1, whose name I can't recall, starts off on the ground in lower difficulties and the attack patterns are quite basic. In higher difficulties, he starts flying around in a freaking tornado and gains new attacks. The combat evolves and becomes more interesting. Now, I am not a fan of the mirror content itself with the heavy copy and pasting, but the boss battle at the end was exactly what I'm looking for in a Borderlands title. Imagine if this concept applied to all or most enemies in the game and not just a few bosses. Enemies would be much more exciting to take on and be more of a fun challenge. An example I can give is think of a basic skag enemy. At a set difficulty of 1, they would run up to your leg and tackle you. Now imagine at a difficulty level of 5, they unlock a new attack instead. They can maybe lunge at you and slam the ground. Now they're not the exact same threat anymore. You have to adapt and learn how to dodge new attacks and take out the skag. Before I go any further, I know some people might be thinking we have a system like that already in place, which is enemy variants. The thing is, enemy variants are not the same thing. Sure, we have pup skags, alpha skags, super bad fire skags, and more, but they all have the exact same attack patterns regardless of your difficulty. If you find a psycho throwing axes at you at the beginning of a new game run, they are going to be doing that exact same thing if you encounter them at the max difficulty. Same threat, but they have more HP and do more damage. Now you could argue why not spawn just the toughest enemy variants for the endgame? Well, we actually already had that. Borderlands 3 set launcher COV enemies every other enemy you encounter, and Wonderlands makes every crab enemy a cursed crab with the exact same attacks. Sure, the challenge is there because the tougher enemy variants are harder to take down, but the combat remains the same at endgame and players might tend to lose interest over time. It isn't exciting to have 5 of the same enemy hitting you with 5 of the same attack over and over. Let's cycle back to Wonderlands and the Chaos level system. Imagine at Chaos 1 enemies are basic, at Chaos level 5 they unlock a new attack, and at Chaos level 10 they unlock their ultimate attack. Maybe Psychos now have the ability to throw grenades when you're behind cover, or Vax unlock a ranged attack and spit acid at you. Combat is more interesting, challenging, and evolved, and there would be no need to slowly scale enemy HP and damage for an additional 40 levels to achieve pseudo difficulty. This would also help preserve the balance of endgame, keeping players invested longer in the game, and prevent another buff or nerf apocalypse from happening to balance out the outrageous enemy HP scaling. Not to mention, this would also help prevent getting one-tap for all of your HP from any enemy attack. One-tap HP gameplay has happened for endgame Borderlands 2, endgame Borderlands 3, and endgame Wonderlands. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about this idea. Do you think that Borderlands 4 would benefit from an enemy attack evolution system? Personally, I do think it would make endgame more challenging without having to excessively bloat the enemy HP and damage values. Don't get me wrong, the HP and damage scaling on enemies should still be there, but it shouldn't be the only deciding factor to make enemies more difficult. Climbing endgame shouldn't feel like a chore, but instead be a fun, challenging, and more enjoyable experience. A player should have to adapt and study the enemy behavior to strategize a plan for taking them out. I know that might sound cheesy because we're talking about a literal video game, but critical thinking goes a long way to keep the player invested instead of turning off the brain and firing many rounds into a healthy enemy until they eventually fall. Giving enemies 2 or 3 unlockable attacks would go a long ways and definitely make Borderlands 4 a step up from the previous titles. Anyways, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this below, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.